The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky here, and today I am with Patty Carl. Patty, welcome.
Thanks so much, Michael. Happy to be here.
So Patty, you're an executive coach and consultant, former chief HR officer. You worked with clients and organizations like Microsoft, Deloitte, numerous Silicon Valley startups. You've also guest lectured at universities, and your insights have been featured in the likes of Forbes, Harvard, and many more. So I'm really excited to have you on here today and to dive into your story and to just extract as much as we can from you in the time that we have to help everyone here in the community.
Thanks. Yeah, I've enjoyed listening to your podcast. I think the narratives of hearing other consultants and their stories are so helpful. So I'm happy to share mine.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. So your consulting journey is still relatively new. You started Highland Performance Solutions, I believe around July of 2019.
Yeah.
What surprised you kind of the most in making the transition from corporate to consultant?
Yeah. What was interesting is I left my last sort of official head of HR job in June of 2018, and I moved abroad and lived in Denmark. As I was there, and I think these journey stories are so important. While I was there, I really thought about, what do I want to do next? What do I love to do? How do I sort of think about and one author created this term, I didn't, but what's my second mountain? Like, what do I want to do, right? What's my next chapter? And, there are pieces of that chief HR officer job that I absolutely love. And it's the leadership development, it's the executive coaching, it's creating HR strategy, people strategy for companies so that they can continue to, develop, retain, and engage their people. And so it was a really easy, frankly, transition for me to think about, how do I take those pieces and hang my own shingle and be able to do sort of the parts of the job that I really love.
Got it. I mean, yeah, I think that part of the story and the narrative and kind of like how you got to where you are is so important. And as we're talking right now, I'm seeing this map behind you. You just talked about Denmark. So I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily, Patty. And I want to know, why did you go to Denmark?
Yeah, well, that's a whole podcast in and of itself. But I actually moved there with my son, who's a professional athlete.
Okay.
When he was a senior in high school. So he's still there, but, at some point they don't need mom anymore. So right. I could come back to my life in the States. But yes, you see maps behind me. I'm an avid traveler and have a sense of adventure. So that's probably served me well also in the consulting space, that I'm sort of willing to take risk and I'm enjoy, the growth and the adventure that you have as a consultant, that you're learning every minute when you're starting a business. And that's, I think, an exciting thing to sort of go through that development arc.
So true. What do you not enjoy? What have you found to be tough in making that transition from corporate to consultant?
Yeah, I think the hard part for me was you're leaving a job that has a lot of structure in it. You also have, by the time you're at a senior level, you have large teams who do a lot of things for you. And so when you're a single sole proprietor, especially in the beginning, if that's how you start, you're the chief cook and bottle washer. You're doing every single thing. And so for me, I don't love a lot of the back office stuff, the scheduling, the billing, setting up all of the systems, getting the website done. So there are sort of all of those pieces that I don't love. I really want to spend my time doing client-facing work.
Right.
So I could definitely leave the other stuff behind. Found a way to delegate that pretty early on, which I think has been enormously helpful in terms of certainly getting the business running in the way I want it to, but also in terms of my own job satisfaction.
Right. How did you identify? So you're making that transition, and I do want to come back to how you actually start to build your business. But as you start to work through that process of getting the business up and running, you're identifying things that you enjoy doing as well as things you don't enjoy doing, which you just hit on. How did you then start to actually bring in either people that you could delegate stuff to or services or technology? Just kind of walk us through, like, what was the first thing that you actually started to delegate and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, the first things were things like the website.
Okay.
And scheduling and putting in, scheduling systems. And it's all of this sort of infrastructure that you need in order to run the business. And so early in 2020, I brought someone on who could do a lot of that work. She happened to also be a former HR manager. So she's been not only a wonderful sort of business manager, but she's also been a really nice thought partner and has been able to take on even some consulting work.
Right.
In terms of, if I have a project that I'm working on, she's able to do more of that. And since then, I've also hired 2 additional people to do more of that consulting work as well.
And so are these people that are full-time? Are they contractors? How are they kind of structured in the business?
Yeah, they're contractors for now.
Okay.
And that's something I think I'll evaluate over the next 6 months or so to see what does the workload look like? What kind of work do I have?
Yeah.
And I also have, in some ways, as a consultant, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, having more fungible resources can be helpful because you never know what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the hardest things to sort of forecast is when you have a referral business, it's often sort of feast or famine. You don't know when the jobs are coming in. And so you might suddenly have a lot of work and you need to farm it out. And then that might be contract for a little while and then you might get another big project. And so having not only folks that I contract with, but also a network of other consultants as sort of they're in my stable, I'm in their stable.
Right.
In case the work is not necessarily in our wheelhouse and we can refer among the group, or B, it's just too large for a small consulting firm to do and we have to bring in partners. And I think that's been really transformative too.
How did you think about or kind of when did you make the decision to start bringing on contractors? I mean, I know you talked about that first person that helped you with the website and the scheduling systems and kind of that whole side of it. But a lot of consultants face a challenge where in their minds, they know, that they're doing, probably a lot more than they should be doing, but they don't want to spend money to bring people on. And so they just say, well, it'll take me, longer to try and train someone and teach them. I can just do it myself and I don't want to spend that money. So for you, what was the kind of the tipping point for you to actually go out and make that decision to start adding team members?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question because it sort of depends, I think, on a number of factors. But I certainly think that for me, I probably brought someone on earlier than maybe someone else might. And that was because it really felt like in order to grow, I had to make an investment that was a bit more front loaded. I think, you could sort of take the stance of, I'm not going to add people until I can really feel like I can afford it. On the other hand, if you don't do it, you're constraining your own growth.
Right.
And so it's that balance. And so I think I made an earlier investment in order to be able to grow. I think my experience as being a head of HR, I know what I'm good at. And conversely, I know what I'm not good at.
Mm-hmm.
In my former executive life, I always had someone on my team who was my complete complement, who could do and loved to do everything I didn't love to do. And that always worked really well. And so for me, early on, I made that investment to grow. And the way that I needed to staff that role is to have someone who was a complement so that I can be
like, why did you do that though? Because I think a lot of people would be in that same place and then they get what you're saying, like, front loading as opposed to maybe just waiting. Isn't it safer to wait? So Is that just like in your DNA, or that did you cultivate that from past experience in terms of being comfortable taking a little bit more risk early on? Essentially, you're making an investment, right? Which is interesting because I know that nowadays you actually make some investments into companies and so forth. But
Yeah.
where does that come from? Any thoughts as to why you felt comfortable at the early stage to make that investment?
That's a great question. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. One is, I think you're right. It's a bit in my DNA. I have a higher risk tolerance than maybe some, but also being in companies that were sort of at all different stages of growth.
Mm-hmm.
There were always conversations around how do you invest for growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having those conversations over the course of my career and, working with leadership teams to sort of place the right bets, I think that probably having had that experience got me more comfortable maybe than someone who had not had those set of experiences, if that makes sense.
Sure. Definitely. I think it's a really important conversation. You're right. It's either you make that investment earlier on and you're setting yourself up, then it's like you kind of take a bit of a knock maybe early, but then you're going to be in a better position as opposed to waiting. And you can see how things pan out. But then if a big project comes up or all of a sudden things are going really well, and you have to now scramble to try and find those resources and you're at capacity. So I think that's great that you're sharing that. Let's now kind of go back a little bit. You made the transition from corporate head of HR to being a consultant. How do you get your first clients? Walk us through where did that first client or two come from?
Yeah, so I did a couple of things. One is I connected with some of the consultants that I had hired. So I was always on the other side of the table.
Right.
And so had a pretty good network of consultants that I could reach out to. I can't say enough about their generosity.
Mm.
And they didn't have to be, right, because ostensibly I could compete with them.
Sure.
They were unbelievably generous in helping me think about what my offerings were, where I wanted to play, and how to sort of go about that. And so connecting with them was really helpful and getting some of that adjunct work with them. But also,
when you say adjunct work, do you mean that they had opportunities and they then brought you into them as kind of a sub-consultant?
Yeah. And that was really helpful because as you're starting something new, you just kind of have to dip the toe in and go and figure it out, as you're going along. That was a nice opportunity to get started as I was sort of ramping up my own referral network, which ended up being maybe less difficult than I had anticipated because my buyers are a lot of my former colleagues. So they're heads of HR. And sometimes they're, especially in smaller companies, they might be CEO, CFO. But in larger companies, they're chief HR officers.
Right.
And those are my people.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. And really, I found that there's less sort of business development to do for me and more just connection. I mean, in these businesses, connection is currency.
Yeah.
And so being able to just reach out to people that were in my network and tell them, this is what I'm doing, and then remind them.
How long did you wait to do that? So from the time that you launched the business, when did you start actually letting people know, not the consultants that you spoke with, but people who would actually be buyers? How many months, weeks, days, years, whatever went by? Kind of take us through that until you started to contact people.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
The first thing I did that was surprisingly effective that I hadn't really anticipated was I simply changed my LinkedIn profile. And when that notifies your network, and I have a lot of connections because I've recruited and I've been in large companies and everyone connects, so I have a pretty sizable network. When I did that, there was suddenly all this interest and hey, I might have something for you. Hey, can we get on the phone and talk about something that I'm working on? And sometimes those are free conversations, right? They're sort of consultative conversations
Yeah.
that sometimes lead to something and sometimes they don't, or they don't lead to something right now, but later they do. And so that was a bigger event than I thought in terms of my network.
What did you change in your profile?
Just my job.
Okay. And what did you change? Did you now say consultant as opposed to head of HR? So it's kind of like your experience section and maybe your title of your LinkedIn profiles. What changed?
And my summary. Yeah. So then suddenly they could see that I was now doing consulting and executive coaching.
Okay.
So that was really helpful. And then I began reaching out to people individually just to say, hey, I'm doing this. Let me know if I can be of help. But also I began writing and publishing. And that was really helpful too, in terms of not necessarily that you get a lot of brand new business from that initially, but what you get is you're building sort of proof points in terms of your expertise with your current network, and they see what you're doing.
So actually, but before we talk about the publications, because I really want to ask you about that, because you've done a great job with it. How long then was it before you actually started to send an email, if you did, to all the different heads of HR that were colleagues, but now potential clients? From the time that you left or launched the consulting business, how long do you say it was before you kind of let people know directly through an email or phone call or text message?
Yeah, I would say probably within the first 2 months.
Okay.
And it's mostly, if you think about your network as concentric circles, it was primarily my closest network that I alerted. And I did not send personal messages beyond that close network.
Okay. So at any point then or now, have you started to reach out to new prospective clients that you don't know directly, but just they're people that you believe you could really help?
Yes. And so a lot of times they're sort of, connections of connections.
Right.
And the publications piece has helped that, because I might send someone that I think might be a really good client. There seems like there would be a good fit there. And I'll send them an article that is germane to the work that I might want to do for them, and just send it to say hello. And check out my new article.
What would you say to them? Kind of give us an example of, obviously, if it's someone that you know, like in your network, or it's a past colleague, that's an easy, hey, how are you doing? It's been a while type of conversation, right? But for someone, let's say, that you don't know, maybe you have some connection in common, maybe you don't. So you have this piece of content that you've created. What are you actually saying in that first email? Just kind of I want to make it as tangible as possible for people. Give us a kind of an example of what might that wording sound like when you send that email to people.
Yeah, it might sound something like, if we do have some connections that might be in common, I will mention that.
Sure. Okay.
Certainly, so that there's already hopefully some credibility.
Yeah.
And then I simply say, I wanted to share my latest article with you. This is the kind of work I do. Let's connect it used to be, let's connect for coffee. Now it's let's connect for, a virtual coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just trying to get sort of a next action, sort of forwarding that action. So what's next? And sometimes you get responses and sometimes you don't.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
So you've talked about publications and how that may not necessarily have led to direct business. Like, you don't publish an article, then receive a ton of leads right away in every case. I'm sure sometimes you do, but not always. How have you gotten into, let's talk about a place like Harvard Business Review, right? So a very well recognized publication, known for being quite selective. Walk us through, what did you do there? Did you know somebody that wrote for them or worked there? Or how did you get into a publication like that?
Yeah, well, one is I hired a coach to help me think about my sort of brand strategy. How do I want to be positioned in the marketplace? What's unique about me? And I knew that I wanted to write and to leverage writing as have that be sort of part and parcel of my career. And so I hired a coach. Actually, I read a book. I'll plug her if that's okay.
It's Dory?
Dory Clark. Yeah.
Yeah, Dory's awesome.
She's fantastic. She wrote a book about sort of having this portfolio career and having sort of different elements within your business that either, create, recurring revenue and or B, things that you enjoy.
Right.
And by the way, if there's an intersection of those two things, fantastic, right? And so I knew that writing was something I wanted to do, whether it was sort of a revenue generator or not. But ideally, I wanted to leverage it for my business.
Is that because it was also like a strength of yours? Did you recognize that I'm good at writing and I enjoy it and I can just get it done or not?
It's something that I love.
Yeah.
Although, to quote Gloria Steinem, sometimes I don't love writing. I love having written.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes it's laborious, but I really do enjoy the process. And I felt like it was a strength that I could bring to the table. I think that, most people would agree that if you've seen someone who has written for credible publications or has written a book, it just positions you in a different way than if you haven't.
Yeah, definitely.
I certainly encourage people to do that. Back to your question. So I started writing different articles and sending them you kind of have to ladder your way up to the more prestigious publications. You have to have that proof, that credibility that you already write well, you've already been published so that you can continue to make your way up that publication ladder.
Clarify. So you kind of start off with, let's say, smaller scale blogs or local papers or things of that nature, industry association types of, and then from there you're moving up to something like an HBR.
That's right.
Got you.
And the other thing that I did was become a Forbes Coaches Council member. Right. And so cut my teeth a bit on contributing to their expert panels and writing for them. So that helped me start to find my voice and helped me figure out what I cared to write about, what seemed to resonate with audiences. And then I could begin to start with those lower level publications and begin to work my way up. And I don't want to say lower level, but there's a lower barrier to entry.
Right.
And then work my way up to something like an HBR Ascend. And that actually, I co-wrote an article with my coach.
Nice.
She invited me to do that, which was fantastic. And that was picked up by Harvard Business Review. And that's how I started getting into Harvard Business Review. So there are different ways to do that, reaching out to people. It can be difficult, but I think some of it is just you have to keep at it until you find, and you also have to test out your material to see what resonates, because something that I think is super interesting may not be that interesting to a broad audience. And I'm always a bit surprised, frankly, about what people sort of connect to.
Yeah.
Or don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. That I think a challenge a lot of consultants face is they get so busy delivering on client projects that they then feel they don't have time to necessarily do marketing or create content. How have you approached that? How do you make sure that you're still able to create content, do marketing, or nurture your kind of referral base, even though you might be very busy delivering on client projects?
That is the challenge, right? It's the capacity management that I think probably every consultant struggles with. For me, it's having sort of that fungible staff, essentially, to be able to pull forward. And if they have sort of flexibility to flex up and down, all the better, because that allows with the work to be able to flex up and down. One of the things that again, a practice that I probably took from my former life is every single thing that I'm doing, I try to look at it through the lens of, is this something that I personally need to do? Or can this be delegated? Can someone else do this and maybe even do it better than I'm doing it? So that I'm really trying to get very surgical about where do I add value and where it must absolutely be me versus some other resource. That's been really helpful.
And so, Pi, do you, in terms of like creating content, because obviously that's a big, for you, writing is a big part of the business and what you're doing. Do you also have, for example, like a specific day or time every week you carve out, it's a recurring kind of note in your calendar, like blocked off for that time? Or do you just kind of approach it when an idea strikes you, you then make time to do it? Like, how do you kind of think about productivity in terms of content creation and balancing that with client delivery?
Yeah, well, number one, I work a lot. But number two, this was an idea, and I'm trying to remember who gave me this idea, but I thought it was a really fantastic idea. Might even have been my coach, but it was the idea of maker time. So time that you have to, where you're creating, and that's different than production, which is the work, right? And it's different than sort of business operations management. And having that, because those things will always take precedent,
right? Unless
you're really intentional.
Yeah, definitely.
Having that creating time. And so I actually blocked that on my calendar.
Awesome. I remember Paul Graham from Y Combinator back in the day talking about like that, the maker's time or maker's schedule or something like that. I don't know if that's maybe where it came from that you're remembering, but that's great. So as you kind of think about where your business is now with everything that you have going on, what are you most looking forward to? What kind of is exciting you, and what are like the big opportunities that you see now?
Yeah, well, I'm writing a book with my husband. So that's personally fulfilling and exciting.
Is that going to be like a business related book or?
Yes, a business related book. So that's kind of an exciting thing to do.
Work in the business? Is your husband in the business with you as well, or?
No, actually, he's a CEO of tech companies. So he has a slightly different, both of us have been business executives, but I also have a therapist background. So we come at things a little bit differently. I have sort of the psychology piece as well as the business piece, but he comes at it certainly from that chief executive perspective. And so we're writing about sort of this intersection of, and then the hope is, and I've not been through this process before, but I'm hoping that it will come out within a year or so. But I'll have to put a lot of maker time on the calendar to get it done. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really exciting. I think the other thing that's exciting for me is the variety of work I'm getting to do that continues to come my way. So I can, at any given time, be doing HR consulting, executive coaching, doing leadership development, running a program for a company who has like emerging leaders. It's fun to be able to do a variety of things. Some people really specialize, and that's fine too. It's what works for you. I personally have a Myers-Briggs that will tell you I have broad and varied interests. And so, to alleviate or to avoid boredom, I have to have a lot of things going on. And so that sort of portfolio career idea really works for me. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about the future.
Did that start? So, I mean, that's really interesting in terms of the portfolio and working all different kinds of projects. Was that from the beginning when you first launched the business, or has that now come as a result of you're connecting with more people, seeing more opportunities, learning what you like and what you don't like, or was it like that even from day one?
That's a really interesting question. I'm fascinated when consultants talk about this because some sort of say from the beginning, this is what I'm doing. This is my specialty. Maybe that works well. For me, I felt like because I have these varied interests, I wanted to keep things a little bit open in the beginning and see what did I gravitate toward. I've had a really long career of doing a lot of the same thing. So what would be most interesting to me? And how could I be open and curious about that as opportunities surfaced? And so I've actually continued to have that openness and curiosity, and that if something is really interesting to me, then I do it. And if it isn't, then I don't.
Right.
And that, I think, while it doesn't sort of give me, it probably frustrates the people who work with me around branding, because it feel like a really neat thing I'm all things leadership, but it's not easy to sort of tie up with a bow, right. But it works for me.
Right. And do you think that part of that also comes from, like, when you made that transition from corporate to consultant, were you in a position where maybe you didn't feel rushed, you had to produce income right away, and you kind of just you had a bit more time to see where things would go? Was that part of it for you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly you want the business to be solvent, right. But I also had a nest egg that I could rely on, right, as I figured it out. I think it's a really different situation if you have to put food on the table. I think you have a very different lens. I had the luxury and the grace to figure out what I wanted to do.
Well, Patty, listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on here today and sharing with us a bit of your journey and story. But I also want to make sure that people can learn more about you, of course, the upcoming book, and just, everything that you have going on. So what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, to highlandperformancesolutions.com is my website. And they can certainly look me up on LinkedIn, but I usually post my latest articles and things like that on my website. So they're welcome to see me there.
All right. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes, everyone. Again, Patty, thank you so much.
Michael, thank you so much for the time. This was fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.